We stand on the Thames today, and it behaves itself. The water moves with a polite indifference, brown and unhurried, reflecting office glass and tourist boats. There is noise, engines, laughter, the clink of cutlery drifting from the riverbanks. But there is no danger in the air, no warning, no smell that forces a hand to the mouth. But if we step back, just a little, the river changes its mind. It is the summer of 1858. The heat settles over London like a lid. Brick and stone hold it through the night. Woolen coats itch against the skin. Ink dries too quickly in pens. And the Thames, once a working artery, begins to breathe back. The smell comes first. Not a single odor, but layers of it. Rot, ammonia, sweetness tipping into decay. Human waste, industrial runoff, animal remains, all warmed and stirred by low water and high sun. The river is no longer a boundary or a view. It is a presence. It seeps into courtrooms and parlors. It clings to curtains. It sits on the tongue. We tend to remember history through its moments of decision. Wars declared, laws passed, speeches delivered. But this is not that kind of story. This is administration wearing summer heat. This is governance interrupted by biology. Inside the Houses of Parliament, windows are draped with curtains soaked in chloride of lime. Clerks gag as they write. MPs cut debates short, not out of consensus, but nausea. Outside, carts rattle over uneven stone, carrying refuse to the river's edge, because that is where refuse has always gone. The system is doing what it was built to do. It is just doing it too well. We often imagine Victorian London as soot and gaslight, a place of industry and progress. But progress has a metabolism. Everything consumed must go somewhere. And by the middle of the 19th century, nearly 3 million lives are emptying themselves, daily, into a river that has stopped flowing fast enough to forget. This is the Great Stink, not an event, but a condition. A city discovering that scale has consequences, that routine can become lethal without ever raising its voice. There is no villain here, no single failure, just habits layered over centuries, meeting a summer that refuses to be mild. As we stand here, on the edge of this river that cannot look away from itself, we are not watching a disaster unfold. We are watching a system reveal its limits. The silence of today's embankment is misleading. In 1858, this place was loud with flies, with retching, with the soft panic of a city realizing that the thing it depends on most has turned against it. We don't begin this story with heroes. We begin with smell, and with the unsettling thought that nothing extraordinary has happened at all. To understand how the Thames became unbearable, we have to look beneath our feet, not metaphorically, literally. Because Victorian London was not failing from neglect. It was failing from inheritance. For centuries, the city had relied on a simple assumption, that moving water makes problems disappear. Streets sloped gently toward the river. Gutters led downhill. Household waste, workshop runoff, slaughterhouse remains, all of it followed gravity. The Thames was not just scenery, it was the city's solution. What changed was not the idea, but the scale. London grew without asking permission. New streets were stitched onto old ones. Houses multiplied behind medieval lanes. Cellars were dug. Water closets, modern, convenient, revolutionary, were installed and connected to drains never designed for them. Each improvement was rational. Each connection made sense in isolation. Together, they formed a system that could no longer flush itself. The river itself had been quietly altered. Embankments narrowed its width. Bridges multiplied, their piers slowing the current. Tidal flow still reached upriver, but the water now lingered longer, especially in summer. Sediment settled, waste accumulated. What once dispersed now steeped. There is something deeply unromantic about this part of the story. No grand arches, no marble, just brick tunnels, clay pipes, and inspection covers that never quite fit. Laborers worked waist-deep in slurry, laying conduits by hand. Lime dust stuck to sweat. The smell was constant, but familiar enough to ignore. Until it wasn't. This was infrastructure built for a smaller city, asked to serve a metropolis. The drains did not rebel. They complied. They carried everything they were given, straight to the river. Efficiency, without foresight. Above ground, London appeared ordered. Streets had names. Addresses existed. Ledgers were kept. But below, the logic was medieval. Waste went downhill. Water took it away, or so everyone hoped. What makes this moment unsettling is how reasonable it all was. No one intended to poison the Thames. No one voted to turn it into an open sewer. The system simply followed its original purpose with unwavering loyalty, long after the context had changed. When the heat came in 1858, it did not introduce something new. It accelerated what was already there. The river slowed. The water level dropped. Exposed banks revealed layers of filth baked into the mud. The Thames became less a river and more a long, breathing storage trench. Standing here, we can almost hear it working. The quiet gurgle beneath gratings. The soft slap of water against brick. Infrastructure rarely announces itself. It waits. It absorbs. And when it fails, it does so not with an explosion, but with a smell that cannot be legislated away. This is the anatomy of the Great Stink. Not chaos, but order stretched past its limits. A city discovering that systems remember the conditions they were born into and resent being asked to forget them. If infrastructure is the skeleton of a city, logistics are its daily breathing. And in the summer of 1858, London is breathing badly. Every morning begins the same way. Carts roll out before the heat peaks, wooden wheels clattering against stone. Horses steam faintly in the early light. Men with shovels and hooks move through alleys and yards, collecting what cannot be allowed to sit still. Night soil from cesspits, slaughterhouse offal, brewery waste, ash, rags, everything that civilization produces but refuses to keep. This is not glamorous work. It never was. The men who do it are paid to be invisible. Their labor happens at the margins, before breakfast, after dark, so that the rest of the city can pretend cleanliness is effortless. But by 1858, the margins are overflowing. Cesspits fill faster than they can be emptied. Water closets, once advertised as hygienic miracles, now pour directly into drains already struggling to cope. The river receives it all with mechanical obedience. Nothing is filtered. Nothing is treated. The Thames is not a victim of neglect. It is the final warehouse. The boredom of this system is what makes it dangerous. Every day looks like the one before. The same routes, the same depots, the same riverbank drop points. There is no single moment where someone can say, this is when it broke. It simply becomes worse, incrementally, until the human body notices. And bodies notice in summer. Food spoils faster. Flies multiply. The air thickens. Workers take longer breaks, not out of laziness, but because the heat makes motion expensive. Sweat mixes with grime, and the smell follows them home, into rooms where families sleep close together because space is always limited. Grain shipments still arrive. Coal barges still dock. The empire's trade does not pause for discomfort. But layered on top of this global movement is the quiet, relentless traffic of waste. Unrecorded, uncelebrated, essential. What strikes us, looking back, is how much effort goes into maintaining the illusion of normality. Lime is scattered. Perfumes are burned. Windows are sealed despite the heat. Officials issue notices reminding citizens to be calm, to trust that the situation is temporary. It is logistics trying to outpace biology. Inside government offices, clerks struggle to focus. Paper absorbs smell. Ink carries it. Decisions slow not because people are stupid or cruel, but because nausea is distracting. Meetings are postponed. Committees adjourn early. The machine still turns, but with friction. This is how cities fail, not through collapse, but through maintenance becoming unbearable. The system does not stop. It grinds. And in that grinding, the cost of routine becomes visible. The Great Stink is not an explosion. It is a backlog, a queue that stretches too long. A reminder that every organized society depends not on moments of brilliance, but on thousands of repetitive tasks done well enough, for long enough, under conditions that do not forgive complacency. And when those conditions change, when the heat refuses to lift, the whole arrangement begins to smell like what it really is. To find the people inside the Great Stink, we don't look for speeches. We look for scraps. A letter survives from this period, written by a clerk to his brother outside the city. He does not describe politics. He apologizes for the handwriting. The smell makes his eyes water. He mentions headaches, poor sleep, the constant feeling that food tastes wrong. This is how history reaches us sometimes, not as insight, but as discomfort leaking through the page. Most Londoners never saw the whole system. They experienced it in fragments. A blocked drain outside the house. A neighbor's child sick with diarrhea. The riverbank avoided on the walk to work. The city was too large to grasp at once, so people measured it by their bodies. In poorer districts, the Thames was not an abstraction. It was water drawn for washing. It was a place where children played, because open space was rare. Mothers knew the smell was bad, but bad smells were familiar companions. The idea that air itself could be deadly was still debated. Disease was thought to travel through miasma, vapor, corruption, imbalance. The The theory was wrong, but the experience was not. People could feel that something was off. We find evidence in court records, testimony interrupted by gagging, judges waving handkerchiefs soaked in vinegar, proceedings cut short because the witnesses could not stay in the room. The law, for once, had to acknowledge the body. Soldiers stationed nearby complained of nausea during drills. Dock workers took fewer meals, not out of poverty, but because appetite disappeared. Publicans reported fewer customers. Beer, usually a comfort, struggled to compete with the air. There is something quietly tragic about how ordinary all of this is. No riots, no mass flight. Londoners endure. They always have. Rent still has to be paid. Children still need shoes. The city does not pause for existential reflection. And yet, there are moments. A child asking why the river is sick. A mother scrubbing floors more often, even though she knows it won't help. A clerk burning lavender in his office, hoping scent can stand in for safety. We also see requests. Petitions to local authorities asking for drains to be cleared. Complaints about overflowing cesspits. These are not revolutionary demands. They are maintenance requests. Proof that people understood the problem in practical terms long before it was addressed in grand ones. What's striking is the absence of drama. The Great Stink is remembered because Parliament suffered. But for most Londoners, this was simply life becoming slightly worse than usual. Another layer of inconvenience in a city that already asked much of its inhabitants. History often teaches us about power by showing us its monuments. Here, it teaches us through endurance. Through people adapting their routines, shorter walks, closed windows, altered habits, to survive something no one had planned for. The river did not care who you were. It treated clerks and laborers alike. In that way, it briefly flattened the city. Not through justice, but through shared discomfort. And in that shared discomfort, London began to realize that the problem was not individual behavior. It was collective design. It would be comforting to imagine the Great Stink as a purely local embarrassment, London failing itself in isolation. But the Thames was never just London's river. It was a corridor, a negotiator, a boundary that never quite held. Even in 1858, barges continued to arrive from upriver towns carrying grain, timber, and coal. Crews complained of the smell before they ever saw the city. The river announced London long before its skyline did. Trade did not stop, but it adapted. Loads were moved faster. Time spent docked was minimized. The river became something to endure rather than linger beside. Beyond the city's edge, communities along the Thames lived with the consequences of decisions made downstream. Waste did not recognize parish boundaries. The idea of outside collapses here. There is no clean line between urban and rural when the same water binds them. What we see in this moment is the fragility of the civilization-barbarism divide. Victorians often spoke of sanitation as a marker of progress, a distinction between the ordered city and the imagined chaos beyond it. And yet here is the capital of the empire, brought to its knees not by invasion or rebellion, but by its own efficiency. Negotiation replaces denial. Engineers are consulted. Reports are commissioned, not because compassion has suddenly flourished, but because the system is now interfering with governance itself. The smell enters power. This is where figures like Joseph Bazalgette appear, not as lone geniuses, but as administrators responding to intolerable conditions. Plans for intercepting sewers are not born from visionary futurism, but from desperation. The river must be bypassed. Waste must be carried away before it reaches the Thames. The logic is brutally simple. What's rarely discussed is the uncertainty. No one can guarantee success. The germ theory of disease is not yet accepted. The goal is not health, but relief. To make Parliament breathable again. To allow the city to function without gagging. The boundary between inside and outside shifts. What was once acceptable, dumping into the river, becomes unthinkable. Not because morality has evolved, but because the scale has tipped. The city has outgrown its assumptions. We often frame progress as enlightenment. In reality, it often arrives as discomfort that can no longer be ignored. The Great Stink forces London to renegotiate its relationship with its own waste, and by extension, with the people downstream who share its water. Standing here, we can sense the turning point. Not a clean break, but a slow pivot. The river remains. The smell fades. But the memory of helplessness lingers in the brickwork, in the tunnels that will soon be built to carry the city's refuse elsewhere. Civilization, we realize, is not defined by what it builds, but by what it chooses not to see. And when that choice becomes impossible, change follows. When the summer finally breaks, The Thames does not apologize. The heat lifts. The smell retreats just enough for memory to soften. London exhales and begins, almost immediately, to forget how close it came to paralysis. But something has shifted. The great stink lingers not as a catastrophe narrowly avoided, but as a lesson quietly absorbed. It teaches the city that power is not only expressed through laws and armies, but through pipes, gradients, and the unremarkable discipline of maintenance. That visibility is a privilege systems enjoy only when they are working. When they fail, they announce themselves with a violence that cannot be argued away. We like to think history turns on intention, on courage, on moral clarity. But here, change comes because routine becomes unbearable. Because governance cannot function when clerks retch and debate dissolves into silence. Because the body insists on being counted. The new sewers will be buried deep, out of sight. When they work, no one will notice. That, in a way, is their triumph. The city will resume its habit of forgetting the labor that keeps it habitable. Children will grow up without knowing the smell that once defined summer. The river will look calm again, as it does today. Standing here now, on embankments built to keep the past at bay, we can feel the quiet arrogance of modern distance. We assume we have solved these problems, that we are wiser, cleaner, more advanced. But the Great Stink was not a failure of intelligence. It was a failure of scale meeting habit. And that is a condition every large system eventually faces. Power endures not through spectacle, but through the patient management of what no one wants to think about. Waste, boredom, repetition, the things that make civilization possible precisely because they are ignored. In 1858, London was forced to look, not at itself as an empire, but as a body with limits. The lesson was not heroic. It was humbling, and perhaps that is why it still matters. Because the greatest threat to any system is not chaos, but the belief that routine will always be enough, right up until the moment it isn't.